Roman slaves could be doctors, teachers, and the equivalent of CEOs running massive businesses. Yes, you heard that right. The same society that treated slaves as property also gave some of them positions of incredible power, wealth, and influence. Today, we're exploring the paradox of Roman slavery, where your legal status said you were nothing, but your actual life could be better than most free citizens. This gets complicated fast, so let's dive in. First, we need to understand that Roman slavery was fundamentally different from what most people imagine when they hear the word slavery. We tend to think of slavery as one uniform experience of brutal oppression, and certainly that existed in Rome, especially for agricultural and mining slaves. But Roman slavery operated on a spectrum ranging from absolute horror to surprising privilege. Your experience depended entirely on who owned you, what skills you possessed, and sheer luck. Some slaves lived in conditions worse than animals. Others lived in luxury that free peasants could never dream of achieving. This wasn't a contradiction in the Roman mind, it was simply how their system functioned. Let's start with slave doctors because this seems most counterintuitive. How could someone with zero legal rights be trusted with life and death medical decisions? Here's the reality: Rome desperately needed medical professionals, but Roman citizens viewed medicine as beneath their status. Wealthy Romans considered manual labor, even skilled manual labor like surgery, as degrading, so they imported Greek slaves who were educated in medicine. These weren't people forced into medical work. These were highly trained physicians who happened to be enslaved, often as war captives when Rome conquered Greek territories. A skilled Greek doctor might be captured, enslaved, then immediately put to work treating Roman elites because his expertise was too valuable to waste in fields. These slave doctors treated senators, wealthy merchants, even emperors. They performed surgeries, prescribed medications, diagnosed diseases, and made critical health decisions. Many became so valuable that their masters gave them significant autonomy. Some lived in comfortable housing, received good food, had assistants, and accumulated wealth through tips and gifts from grateful patients. Their legal status was slave, but their daily reality resembled successful professionals. The most successful could eventually purchase their freedom or receive manumission as a reward for exceptional service. Once freed, these physicians often became incredibly wealthy and respected, though always carrying the social stigma of former slave status. Now let's discuss slave teachers, which reveals even more about Roman society's contradictions. Education was highly valued in Rome, but again, Romans viewed teaching as inappropriate work for citizens. So wealthy families purchased educated slaves, usually Greeks, to tutor their children. These slave pedagogues lived directly in households, teaching reading, writing, mathematics, rhetoric, philosophy, and Greek language to Roman children. Think about this situation. You're legally property with no rights, yet you're entrusted with shaping the minds of Rome's future leaders. You're teaching senators' sons, preparing them for public life, influencing their worldview and values. These slave teachers often wielded enormous informal influence. A talented pedagogue became essential to his master's family. The children he educated might grow up to be powerful politicians or generals, and they remembered their teachers. Many former students helped their childhood tutors gain freedom or supported them financially after manumission. Slave teachers lived relatively comfortable lives compared to other slaves. They had access to libraries, participated in intellectual discussions, and were treated more like valued employees than property. Some masters consulted their educated slaves on important decisions, seeking advice on everything from business to philosophy. But the most surprising position was the slave manager or business administrator, the ancient equivalent of CEOs. Wealthy Romans owned extensive business interests, including farms, workshops, trading companies, and real estate. Managing these enterprises required skill, education, and trustworthiness. Rather than manage businesses themselves, which they considered beneath their dignity, wealthy Romans appointed talented slaves as managers with full operational control. These slaves, called vilici or procuratores, ran entire operations. They made hiring and firing decisions, negotiated contracts, managed finances, bought and sold goods, and controlled significant wealth. Some managed businesses worth millions in modern currency. A slave manager might oversee hundreds of workers, both slave and free. He might travel extensively for business, live in luxury accommodations, and make decisions affecting his master's fortune. The paradox is staggering. This person legally owns nothing, not even his own body, yet controls assets and makes choices that free citizens working for him must obey. Why did Romans trust slaves with such responsibility? Multiple reasons. First, slaves couldn't legally own property, so everything they managed technically belonged to their master. This created built-in loyalty since the slave's success was inseparable from his master's wealth. Second, slaves couldn't hold political office or pursue independent ambitions that might conflict with their master's interests. A talented free citizen might use your business as a stepping stone to his own career. A slave remained dependent on you. Third, the threat of punishment or sale ensured compliance. A slave manager who stole or mismanaged could be whipped, tortured, or sold to mines. This created a powerful incentive for honest, competent work. Fourth, masters often promised eventual freedom as a reward for exceptional service, giving slaves long-term motivation to excel. These privileged slaves accumulated what Romans called peculium, personal savings technically owned by their master but functionally theirs to manage. Successful slave managers, doctors, and teachers saved substantial amounts, sometimes enough to purchase their own freedom and still have wealth remaining. After manumission, they entered the freedmen class, former slaves who were now free but still connected to their former masters as clients. Many freedmen became extraordinarily wealthy. Some of the richest people in Rome were freedmen who leveraged their skills and connections and savings into business empires. The novelist Petronius satirized this phenomenon with his character Trimalchio, a freedman so wealthy he hosted absurdly extravagant parties, yet still carried the social stain of former slave status that prevented him from being fully accepted by aristocratic society. Let's address the uncomfortable question: does this opportunity for advancement somehow make Roman slavery less terrible? Absolutely not. The existence of privileged slaves doesn't erase the suffering of millions who died in mines, fields, and brothels. For every slave doctor living comfortably, thousands of slaves were being worked to death in conditions of absolute horror. The privileged positions existed precisely because most slaves suffered terribly, creating the wealth that made specialists valuable. It's also crucial to understand that even privileged slaves lived with constant precariousness. Your comfortable life depended entirely on your master's mood and financial situation. If your master died, you might be sold to someone who'd send you to the mines. If your master faced financial ruin, you'd be liquidated as an asset. One false accusation, one mistake, one moment of bad luck, and your privileged position could evaporate instantly, replaced by torture or execution. You lived well, but you lived in constant underlying fear because you owned nothing, controlled nothing, and your life belonged to someone else. The psychological toll was immense even for successful slaves. Imagine being a brilliant doctor or teacher, respected for your expertise, yet unable to make basic decisions about your own life. You can't marry without permission. Your children, if you have any, belong to your master. You can't refuse any order. You must watch free citizens, far less talented than you enjoy, rights and dignity denied to you. The cognitive dissonance of being simultaneously powerful and powerless must have been psychologically devastating. Roman literature occasionally preserves voices of educated slaves, and you can sense their frustration, their awareness of the system's injustice, and their helplessness to change it. Here's the final twist that really shows Rome's moral bankruptcy. Romans saw no contradiction in this system. They believed slavery was natural, that some people were meant to be slaves regardless of their abilities. A brilliant Greek physician was still fundamentally inferior to the stupidest Roman citizen simply by legal and ethnic status. Talent and intelligence didn't change your essential nature as property. This allowed Romans to simultaneously rely on slave expertise while maintaining the fiction of their own superiority. It's a masterclass in societal cognitive dissonance. So yes, Roman slaves could absolutely be doctors, teachers, and business leaders wielding real power and accumulating wealth. But this reflects Rome's pragmatism and contradictions more than mercy or enlightenment. They created a system where talented slaves could excel because it benefited masters economically, not because Romans recognized slaves' humanity or rights. These success stories shouldn't obscure slavery's fundamental evil, but they do reveal historical complexity that challenges our simple narratives about the past. What are your thoughts on this paradox? Drop them in the comments and subscribe for more complex historical analysis.